first thing I want to do, because this is going to be put together in 4 pieces. So foundation paper piecing, you know, you kind of build it up as you go. But because these are coming together in a point here in the middle, we can't do it just as one block. And we have to pick a place that we could start and grow out, and each one of these have one. So we're going to start with number 1 on each of them and build out. Okay, does that make sense?
I mean, some, yeah.
Okay.
I assume that everybody's got a little bit of experience with foundation paper piecing. I know I don't really,
Yeah,
so.
not everybody. So we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this into the quarter. So it tells you here, this is your first trim line. So we're going to cut on this and cut our 4 sections. And this block is pretty cool because it actually looks like it's woven. And I'll bring the finish back over and show you.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of other blocks that I've seen you do, but without the woven part of it, right?
Yeah,
So it
so
looks sort of like an Ohio Star or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, exactly. It's that same sort of, like, if we just looked at the outline of it, it's a pretty traditional looking quilt block. But what's really cool about it is it looks like this piece goes under and then back up here. This goes under, same, which is like all these, it's a woven ribbon is what it is. And I love it. I think it's really cool. So it comes together with the 4 triangles, and you can kind of see it here that they all come together just like this. Okay, so we're going to build each of these separately. And I will say the part of this that was confusing at first is, how do I know what to put where? So that's the hard part. Okay, so I've got my pieces. So I have my pieces. The pattern tells you what size to cut the different parts of it. You're going to cut one part that is longer and one part that is shorter. And that's what kind of does these longer, shorter pieces. So the longer piece will go here, shorter piece will go here. Okay. And it's going to look like it's woven because of that. I wouldn't worry too much. Like, these are not perfectly the same, but you're never going to notice if the pattern doesn't continue exactly. The less straight lines you have, the better, though. So a print that is more like a tossed print like this will work much better than something that has lines on it. I did do one that has very vertical lines on it, and it did not work as well. Okay, so you're going to cut all of these. You need the pair of each color or fabric that you're going to use, and then you need 4 of those. Okay, so what I'm going to do first to figure out where my fabrics go is I'm going to lay this out like the block is going to go. So I will say that when you're going to piece it together, it's going to be the opposite way. Let's see which I can get this. Okay, so when I put this together, when I actually sew this, this is going to be on the other side. And if you're not familiar with paper piecing, we're going to sew everything to this side and sew along these lines. But for right now, I want to have these lines up so I can actually see what I'm doing and which pieces go where. Okay, so I'm just going to start laying them out, and I'm going to put the short one on a short side and the long one on a long side, and just keep doing this until I get all the pieces laid out. 3 is obviously the long one, 2 is the short one. Okay, once I've gotten it there, then I'm going to go ahead and put my other pieces on, which is going to be a triangle, one triangle. So each piece gets 3 triangles. Triangles are 2 different sizes. And I'm just going to put one of the big one down, and then 2 of the others down for each one. So then I have all of my pieces for each triangle. Okay, so at this point, this is the organization that you need to have so that you can put these together and have them actually work. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of push these to the side. I can stack them up. Okay, and then I can work them through. So we're going to start with this one here. And I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to put my triangle here. And kind of lift this up and be able to see behind it. If you need to see better, you can always put it up on a window or get a light board that you could see it through. This is pretty easy, and they do have you cut the pieces much larger than you actually need, which I find helpful. So we're going to put down piece 1, which we know is the triangle. Then we're going to put down piece 2, which is the short one. Okay. So triangle, and then the short piece. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to put my short piece down, make sure I have it right side up. Okay, and I can give it a little look and see. Yes, in fact it is. Let me show you. Another way of doing it is that you can fold on the sewing line. And then you can totally see that you have enough room here. Okay? So then if you are new to this, it's a good idea to go ahead and stick a pin. Okay, so I can stick a pin in it here, hold it in place, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew from before the seam allowance line here across and past into the 3, about 1/4 of an inch on either side, just to secure it really well. So let's go over to the machine and I will sew that. All right, so now I'm going to wake up my machine. I'm going to make sure that my stitch is at a 1.4. So 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, somewhere around there is what you want. You want a nice tight little stitch so that it will not come out when you tear it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lift my foot here, put this down, and I'm not going to back stitch or anything. I'm just going to do teeny tiny little stitches. And I'm just following right along that line between the 1 and the 2. Go ahead, stitch past about 1/4 of an inch and cut my thread. All right, so now once I've done that, I can take this pin out and I need to trim the seam allowance here. So they make this fancy little ruler called an add a quarter, which I love, and it has a little lip on here that I can just nudge right up to where I folded it. I'm just going to add 1/4 of an inch to what I did. Okay, so now I need to go ahead and push this out, and I'm just going to use my little seam roller here to push this out. You can go ahead and use your iron each time if you want to get a much crisper finish, but usually I will do it like this and then finish it at the iron at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this one on. I'm going to make sure it's butting up to where it needs to, because basically it's going to go from edge to edge here. All right, and put it in there. Flip it over. Yep, that looks pretty good. If I fold this back on the sewing line, it's a tiny bit small, so I'm gonna edge it over just a little. And that way I can kind of work with my line here too and try to get it at least somewhat straight. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and pin that again. And then we're going to sew it from here to here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down, start before the line, and then just sew right along that little line. All the way across. Again, it's a tiny little stitch, and this does 2 things. Is it holds it really tight, so you have a nice sharp seam there, but it also lets the paper perforate so that it will come off easier when you're done. All right, so then I'm going to come over here. We're going to lean this back. I'm going to tear that up just a little bit. I'm going to try to tear more of the paper than the threads, but a lot of times the threads will come out, and that's okay because we've got a nice tight seam there, and it's not going to go anywhere. Again, I'm going to put my add 1/4, oops, up to the edge, trim it, and press it, yes, again. Okay, so now we've got it to this point. We're going to add the corners on. So I'm going to kind of look where those are. I could go ahead and fold it.
What's the difference between the Violet Craft seam presser and, say, like a brayer?
The seam roller is a little bit different because the spinny part here has a lump in the middle. So it isn't super flat. So a brayer is meant to smash something very flat and like glue. And this is actually meant to just press in the middle there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So our next triangle is going to go, well, technically it's supposed to go here. It really doesn't matter whether you do 4 or 5 first. And I'm going to go ahead and here. Okay, I can kind of hold it with my fingers at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and sew here.
Because you're always crossing you're always crossing another seam at the beginning and the end.
Correct.
You're not having to backstitch or reinforce your starts and stops. Is that
right? Right. These will be open, but it's also a teeny tiny seam. So like a teeny tiny stitch right there, it's not going to tear out very easily at all. That's part of that whole tight stitch that helps.
Got it. It adds some resilience that normally you might have to do a reinforcement or a backstitch.
Exactly, but these are tiny stitches, so this helps. So a smaller stitch will definitely do that for you. So now that we've got 4 on, we're going to put 5. This one you need to make sure that it's pushed out of the way because you can sew it right on top of it and keep that little flap down, which would be bad. So make sure you push that out of the way. I'm going to make sure that it covers and go stitch it again. All right, so now that we've got all the pieces sewn on, we've sewn 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and then 5 over here. Okay, so I'm going to give it a little press again. Okay, so at this point, we need to trim the whole block. So I'm just going to turn this over and trim along these lines. So where the solid line is where we're cutting. So I'm going to cut this bottom one first because it's the wiggliest on these corners. So I found that if I cut this first, it's a bit better and I have a more accurate cut. So I just line the ruler up against that line. It's real thick right there. That's why I was having a little sound that it did. Okay, and then I'm going to trim here. And then suddenly we will have a perfect looking little block. All right, so that is 1 out of 4. So we're going to do this 4 times and we'll have a block that we can put together. I'm going to show you how I did it when I could do 2 blocks at the same, or 2 triangles at the same time rather than 1 at a time, and that helps the process go a little bit faster. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do it with 2 of them at the same time, so it's a little bit easier. You can chain piece just a tiny bit. I really suggest not going more than 2 because it will get too confusing with the whole, the woven aspect of this. All right, so I'm going to put my 2 triangles that are for either side away. I need the big triangle. And I'm going to put that here in the middle. I'm going to flip this one over and do the same thing. Okay, can you see that all right?
I can.
So I'm going to put this here. All right, now I need to figure out which side has the short side, and that's going to be this one. Try to line up those edges. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Whoops, that one was that one. And then this one is going to be here. Yep. Okay. So now I'm going to take these over and I'm going to sew both of them at the same time. All right, so I'm going to make sure that those are still in the right place. Make sure that nothing is folded under anywhere, and then I'm just going to sew these. So once you've gotten a little bit more confident, you can absolutely just kind of sew and don't have to pin so much. But I do suggest that you pin at the beginning because it's easier to kind of learn the muscle memory that you have to do and what you need to check to make sure it's all right. I went a little further than 1/4 of an inch on that. It's totally fine. There's no problem with that. All right, And then this back where it's supposed to be. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stitch this one. So being able to do these like kind of 2 in a row is helpful just because it makes it a little bit faster. But more than that, it will get confusing. So again, press that over. Use the add a quarter ruler. Oops. Trim. And trim. So this does a little bit of the, okay, I'll do something twice in a row and it makes it a little faster than doing them one at a time. Okay, so now push this up. The same thing here. Now, if this is right, which I know it is, I'm going to have one of these fabrics on the other side because this is the short side of it and it's going to match up to be the long side in the block. So if I have 2 that are next to each other, I would have one of this and one of this, but these, so I have 2 of this one, but just one each of these. If I were to have these 2 blocks, I'm going to have 2 of this one, but one each of these. So that's what happens. You're going to have 3 different fabrics on 2 triangles. Okay. So once you figure this out, then it gets a little bit easier. So now I have this piece and I have this piece. I know that this one isn't going to go here because it needs to go on the other triangle. Okay, so the matching one is never going to go on the same side. These are always going to be different. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. That's a great checks and balance.
Yeah, exactly. And that took me a couple of times. I probably did 4 of these just one at a time. And I was like, this is really time consuming. But this helped to double them up and to be able to kind of do a double check as to where they go. So again, we're going to do the same thing and bend this over. Oops. Make sure that I am in the right place. Okay, put that to the side. Do the same thing here. I'm going to fold it over. And the way that foundation paper piecing works, we're always going to be dealing with the seam allowance is the part that's in the place where that's going to go. So you don't ever want to put your fabric here. If it's going to end up in here, it never starts in here. Okay, it's always going to end up over here. The seam allowance is there, then it will fold over. So right sides together. I'm going to bring it over the machine. And then we're going to fold this back here. So there are a couple of ways of doing this part, the trimming. What I have found is that if I keep the paper side up and I pull it back, I have something bigger to rock this against to do the 1/4 of an inch. It's also easier to see that I've got this folded back and I'm not accidentally doing this, which I will say has happened in more classes than I could count, is where they'll just put the ruler on here, trim it off, and accidentally trim the paper. So trimming paper side up makes sure that you don't actually do that. So now that I've got that done, I actually have 4 places that I can trim and press, which makes me feel like I'm actually saving a little bit of time. So I'm going to pull this apart down here. This one wants to tear, and you can see how easily it tears, which is not a big deal if it pulls up like this. I just push it out of the way completely and then go ahead and trim that. All right, so we're getting there. I've got 3 out of 4. We're going to start seeing this come together here. Okay, so we got 1 more to do. I'm going to do that real quick and we'll come back and put this together. All right, so now we've got all 4 of those ready to go. We're going to make sure that they're going to go together right. If we have to start this over, we're starting with a whole new block. We're not going to take anything out. Okay, so we've got it weaves under, weaves under, weaves under, weaves under. We're good. All right, so now we need to sew these together. The point that we have to be careful of is this spot right here. We want those to match up nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do it in halves first. And I'm going to look to make sure that this is matching. So I'm going to pin it in here to make sure that these match. And then I'm going to pin one here and one down here. And you can see that these ends want to kind of flail around. So I end up pinning in just a little bit here because I just want to make sure that that 1/4 inch seam allowance stays. So I do 3 pins. What I have found, I tried with the Wonder Clips and they don't hold it tight enough for this spot right here. And then these kind of want to move anyway. So pins work really well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew that one, but I'm going to get this one pinned first too. We'll just pin them both at the same time, then go sew them both at the same time and be ready to go. So we did talk about, you asked about back stitching, and normally we don't, but this spot I'm going to, okay, because this is the center and I'm going to press that seam open. So I want to get that nice and sturdy here so that it's not going to do anything when I push that seam open, not sort of break open.
That makes sense.
So I want to back stitch there, take the pins out before I get there. Make sure I don't stitch over them at all. And then I'm going to back stitch here too, just a little bit, because this is on the end and it's also going to be spread open there. It's where it's going to want to pull apart. We don't want that to happen. All right, so before I go any further, I do a little double check, make sure that I've got a weave happening there. If you notice it here, it's a lot easier to fix than if you notice it, 2 more seams down the road. All right, so now we've got them sewn together. Let's do a double check on this one. Make sure we did it right. Looks like we did. Fabulous. All right, so this is the part where if you had to take something out, you could, because when you're sewing these together, it's really important that you make sure that you sew on this side. So the side that you're supposed to sew on. Basically, if you sewed this side together, you'd have to take it out and redo it. So make sure that you're sewing the right side of the triangles together. All right, so then I'm going to take out the paper here in the middle, just down this center seam. And I'm going to try not to take out any of the stitches here. I found that when I was using the I started with a 1.8 and I found that all of those stitches would come out. And even with the 1.6 they do, and even this one, it came out a bit. So know that they will come out some. You just don't want them to come out too much, because you don't want these seams to split. Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing here.
Is that because when you remove the paper, it loosens up the stitch just a little?
Yeah, it kind of it pulls against it and it pulls the stitches out.
Okay.
So if you wanted that to not happen, you could back stitch, but it's not it's not important because this seam here is so tight that this can't open up past that. So even though they've opened up, see if I can get it to happen. So right here, like there was a seam right here and now that seam is gone. But even with that, it can't spread open in here because this seam is so tight. Okay, so that will work out totally fine. Got the paper off of that side, paper off this side. And you can see the paper tears out so easily with this. It really made me happy because they don't always tear out so easily. All right, now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to split this open. And that's just to make it lay a little bit flatter. I prefer it to be open in the middle than nested on something like this. So a lot of times I want to nest a seam in the middle, but this one, it's just got too much going on. And I'm gonna make them match this. Still looking good. Think we did it. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and match up these seams. And then I'm gonna put one before I get to that seam. So that's the way I usually pin those. And then I want to make sure that these are going to match. So I'm going to put one here. Come along here and try to get that to match. And I'm going to stick one at the end because you can see it'll want to like just kind of splay open there. So I'm just going to push these together. Stick a pin in there. This one wants to stay fine, but I'm going to stick a pin in here that I don't have to take out. So I'm going to leave this in here, sew along here, take these pins out. But this will keep this end together that I might have a hard time getting underneath the foot and having it splay. I don't want that to happen, so I'm just going to pin it in place, and then we'll sew along this seam. This is the way it looks like after I've given it a little bit of a press. And then they're going to start to come together in this really fun way. See if we can just see what they look like when they kind of join together. I'm not going to trim these tails right now either, but you're going to see this is start to look really fun. Right? And you can see the difference, the way the colors work with each other. If you did this in a solid, with solid colors of different, you know, different shades of purple or something like that, I could see it being really interesting. The woven on the print is a little bit subtle. You kind of have to look for it, but depending on the colors or the prints that you used, it could be a really dramatic woven star. I absolutely love it. So I hope that helped. Happy sewing.